Welcome to All Ask the Questions Around Here, the podcast where we explore life's unexpected intersections. I'm your host, Dr. Joseph Elisha. Today, like always, we'll journey from the challenging conversations to the inspiring and lighthearted discussions that connect us all. Let's begin. Welcome to All Ask the Questions Around Here. I'm Dr. Joseph Elisha. Today's guest knows how to make sense of our financial world. He's a numbers guy with a heart, a financial planner who doesn't just crunch data, but crafts futures. Brandt Kuhn is a managing director and partner at Beacon Point, where he helps clients turn financial goals into real-life wins, whether it's planning for retirement, maximizing tax strategies, or just figuring out how to afford that dream Airstream life. A proud La Quinta High grad and Cal Poly San Luis Obispo alum, Brandt came back to the Coachella Valley not just to build portfolios, but a family and a legacy. He's a proud husband of Erin and dad to two high-octane boys, Brooks and Owen, who keep him just as busy as the markets do. When he's not managing investments, you'll find him swinging for birdies on the golf course, hiking through national parks, or rallying for causes close to home, like the Desert Cancer Foundation and other local organizations he served with passion. He is a double 40 under 40 honoree, a leadership Coachella Valley alum, and an all-around stand-up guy with serious financial chops and a serious appreciation for life's big picture. So whether you're looking to grow your wealth, learn a thing or two about financial planning, or just enjoy some good conversation, Brandt's bringing clarity, wit, and a lot of wisdom to our conversation today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You've built a pretty successful financial career and a family, all in the hometown that you grew up in. What brought you back to the Coachella Valley? You could have done this in any big city and, could have been just as successful, if not more.
I graduated high school in 2004, and the world was, having all kinds of things going on during that period of time. And shortly thereafter, I got involved as an intern at a local wealth management firm up in San Luis Obispo in 2006, not knowing, kind of what was around the corner come 2008 and, truly the great financial crisis at that point and great recession. And so June of 2008 is when I graduated college. And, it couldn't have been a worse time, especially being in the financial world, but at the same time, it was kind of the bottom, right? And so
you can only go up.
Exactly. So it was a great opportunity to really dive into helping people in a different way, and I think that's where I wanted to come back to a place of familiarity. I grew up here in the Coachella Valley. And this is a place that I saw with a lot of opportunity. Even back then, it was hard to fathom some of the costs that were going on in more of the coastal cities, and just how you were going to kind of make it all work. And so I really wanted to come back to a place that I knew people, that people knew me. And in this business, is we're really selling trust, and we want to make sure that we know people and they know us. And that's what really brought me home, I think.
What did young Brandt want to do? Was financial planning always on the radar for you? Or did you pop out of the womb and say, I want to become a financial planner?
Yeah, my dad actually played baseball and went to Stanford and studied economics. He then, from there, he actually got to play for the Yankees for 3 years, got up to AAA. And then from there, he went into the pharmaceutical business, actually. So he was in that world. His territory was Santa Barbara to San Diego, which was a pretty tremendous territory for the
large territory.
A lot of miles, and traffic was not nearly as bad as it is these days. So you could at least get around. But my grandfather worked for American Airlines. So there wasn't kind of the family business, if you will, or, that anybody was in one particular field. But I knew I wanted to get more familiar with just business in general and how things worked from that aspect. And I actually ended up going to a meeting with my grandparents' financial advisor, and just they kind of said something along the lines of, this guy kind of reminds us of what you could be, and like, there's a lot of similarities, being, just, kind of more outgoing and wanting to get to know people and that sort of thing. Maybe you should take a page out of his book, or at least ask him some questions. And so that's what I did. Junior year of high school, had that meeting and just asked him purely, how did you get to where you are? And so he said, take as many finance classes as you can when you get to college. And that's what I did. From there, I took as many tax accounting classes as I could. In our investment world, we are not allowed to guarantee any rates of return, but in my mind, the IRS does by providing you some tax savings. And so the more I can help clients really understand their tax circumstance and save in that way, that just adds to the value that they're getting on their investment returns as well. So as far as like what got me interested, I think it was just a curiosity, and continue to push it farther and farther. And sometimes, when you're on a hike or, climbing a mountain, you look back and go, wow, I've come a lot farther than I thought I would. And
Right,
it's
right.
worked out really well. So,
And that's a great feeling.
yeah.
Now, Brandt, you're a father.
Mm-hmm.
And how has fatherhood shifted your perspective about money, planning, or even risk?
As a certified financial planner, which I was very focused on getting that as soon as possible. And I do believe I'm one of the earliest certified financial planners as far as the age that you could get it, because you have to have a college degree and 3 years of experience and go through classes and pass the tests and all those sorts of things. And so there's kind of a certain period of time that you can get it. And because I was interning in college, I was able to use those letters very shortly after I graduated. And to me, there's a big difference between textbook learning and living it, right? And really learning through experience. And going through the CFP process, and you've got all the aspects of somebody's financial life, right? You've got their investments, you've got their insurance, you've got their estate planning, all these things that there's literally a chapter in every book on what to do and how to do it, until you become, in those seats and start talking to other clients that are going through these circumstances, or, now starting to live those things out. So, having children meant I needed to go get my, trust and wills taken care of, and get our powers of attorney and those sorts of things, and ask those hard questions of, something happens to us, what do we want to have happen, to the kids, and those sorts of things. And make sure we've got some of the pieces in place that are really foundational for a overall financial life and plan. And I think getting into the seat of having kids and being a father really changes that perspective.
Now, speaking of that, did you happen to include me and my 5 kids and all of those people in your trust, as we had previously discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a small amount, but it can be divided by many folks. So
yes, I don't want any of your debt, just the positive assets.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just the left side of the balance sheet. Got it. Yeah.
Yes, please.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Now, Brandt, let's get real here. What's the biggest misconception people have about financial planning, in your experience, obviously?
Yeah, I think a combination of our industry, as well as our kind of apparatus in general of the tax laws and investments, and we make things that are relatively simple extremely complex, right? So the idea of saving for retirement should be very simple, but we've got all kinds of between 401ks and IRAs and 403bs and all these numbers and letters that seemingly shouldn't go together, but they're dictating how people do things with their financial lives. So I think that's the biggest part, is that nobody teaches this stuff. There's very few classes in traditional school. Unfortunately, things like home economics, which that's a building block in terms of you talk to clients of mine that are in their 60s or 70s or 80s. That's how they ran the household, was through those home econ classes and balancing checkbooks and all these things that work so well that we stopped doing them. And so I think the biggest misconception, at least from just an approachability perspective, is that it's too complex and I'm not good at it, so I'm not even going to try. And I think that's where overcoming that hurdle of, we've got some amount of personal responsibility that we all have to take in terms of our own financial life to make it successful. And And that's easy to say. It's hard to do. And the reason that is, because we've never had more demand in terms of our dollars these days, right? When
Right.
you make a dollar from your job, you've got to keep the roof over the house. You've got to keep food on the table. You've got to somehow pay down debt, student debt, or car loans, or whatever else is going on. You've got to try and squirrel away a little bit of money for retirement. You've got to help put kids through school. I work with a lot of physicians, and the numbers are staggering in terms of the amount of student debt that they're a lot of times coming out of medical school with.
Of course. I think it's close to like what, 300,000 or so.
Yeah, no, it's not uncommon that I see those numbers, and then you get a husband and wife, or two spouses that are physicians, and all of a sudden you've got $500,000 to $600,000 in some cases. So and so we're trying to devise a plan to just pay off the debt, before their kids start going to college, right? And it just feels like you're kind of on this wheel that it's really hard to figure out a way out of. So it used to be so much simpler, right? I go back to my grandfather working for American Airlines for 40 years. It's the same company. He never changed companies. He's changed locations, but he never
Yeah.
changed companies. He had something called a pension that rarely exists anymore, which basically means the day he stopped working or retired, his paycheck did not. It just kept coming every month, and my grandmother still receives that check today. And it covered a significant amount of their costs well into their retirement. So and had no worries about the market, right? They didn't have to worry about what was going on,
It
with
was
trade
taken care
talks or
of.
anything else. Yeah, it was all
Of
just there
course.
for them. So
Of course.
I think it's become so much more of a personal mission for everybody, that we all have to, and we all come from different circumstances, but we just got to start somewhere and build that plan.
It's interesting, Brand. I went to the number one medical school in the country at that time, and it still is. And I wish, and I say this all the time, I wish they had offered us at least one course on business, finance, and economics. And I have to admit, I've forgotten 80% of what they taught me. But I would have remembered a course on personal finance and how to go from a position of debt where you're actually paying for your education to the tune of 30, 40, 50, $100,000 a year, to all of a sudden getting into residency. You're earning maybe about $60,000 to $80,000 a year. And then once you finish residency, you're in the six digits, right? And all of a sudden, you are a business, right? Regardless of how you look at it, whether you're employed or whatnot, you have this high income, you do have these debts, and what do you do with it? And we had zero education on that. And somehow we're supposed to figure it out, right? They teach you everything else but that. And I just wish that they would have made some changes to our curriculum. And I got a hard lesson in that in 2010. The hospital canceled the anesthesia contract, and most of us found ourselves without a job. And at the time, I was the only breadwinner, 5 kids, and I ended up commuting to another state for work just to keep things stable and not to, head into financial ruin. And careful planning obviously would have helped. Some good business advice could have helped. Now, there is obviously personal responsibility involved here. But if I had had that level of education out the gate, I would have been able to head off that situation. And this is, of course, only 2 years after 2008, right? So it was a very difficult time and some very hard lessons learned. And obviously, as they say, there is meaning in suffering. So I learned some really good lessons from that and adjusted course. So I find that as an issue because in our environment, and I think moving forward, most doctors are going to find themselves employed by either hospitals or private equity-backed organizations. And of course, the way that hospitals are getting around the corporate practice of medicine is they have these nonprofit boards that can employ physicians. But still, you're dealing with a high level of income. And that's, I think, where people like you come in, where you're like, okay, I know this seems like a lot of money that's coming to you, but you've got all these other expenses that need to be managed and these debts and whatever. And that kind of moves us to the idea of the role of money in not only in our financial well-being, but our mental well-being. And as you know, there are studies that say, you know what, beyond $75,000 a year, you really can't be any happier with more money, right? And of course, there's a lot of variables that go into that. What if you have 10 children or you have no children, right? What do you think is the role of money in our mental well-being? And obviously, if there are people out there who live paycheck to paycheck, then you go to sleep thinking about money and you wake up thinking about money and how to make more of it and how to make the expenses, right? What's your thoughts on that?
It certainly is a cause of anxiety, and I've had several clients where it's interesting that you bring up the income amount, because I have several clients that that's all they think about is the amount of income, and they don't really think about the portfolio size or where things are in that aspect, and so they have this anxiety, right? And it can be crippling. It's really hard for them to make decisions, even when they are in a very fortunate position that they're going to be okay. But for folks that are not necessarily in that circumstance, you see articles out there all the time that say the average, and maybe it's even higher than 50% of people that can't afford, I've seen anywhere from $1,000 surprise bill all the way down to $400, right? So some surprise thing, your car breaks down, or something happens with your air conditioning out here in the desert. That's it's not a like to have, it's a must to have. Yeah. Or it can be very dangerous when those things break down, and it can be very costly. So I think that anxiety level of not being able to make those dollars and those paychecks meet, and having these gaps is very, very challenging. What do you do about it? I think we all have the same number of hours in the day, and we've got to figure out the best way that we can really trade our time for money in those periods of earning years, whatever that may be. And if that's picking up a skill that is very valuable, or if it's working a job or two in order to make ends meet. Hopefully, there is a time where you're able to get over that hump and not have to worry about every single dollar that comes in, but that you're actually creating some margin in your life, that you've got a gap between what you need and what's coming in. Come with its own challenges too, because maybe there's been a lot of sacrifice to get there, and that's where we start to see maybe a little bit of exhale, where people start to say, well, I worked really hard and I deserve that, and that very well may be true, but we also need to make sure that we're building a safety net for ourselves, so that when something happens, not if, but when life happens, that we've got the resources to be able to tackle those issues.
Sure. What's your personal view on the amount of reserves one should have as a general rule?
Yeah, I think it really depends on how secure the income source is, and it certainly feels like this day and age, all jobs are fleeting, and things are moving around so much quicker than where they were just a few years ago, or certainly decades ago. It used to be you kind of got a job, and it was real hard to get fired or let go, and there was a lot of identity, and also there was a connection between you and your employer, whatever that employer might be. These days, it just seems so much easier to people are moving around a lot more. We literally had this thing called the Great Resignation a couple of years ago. Remember that, where people are just leaving their jobs for a couple dollars more or whatever the case was, and you really are seeing people feeling like they can't, if they're not moving up in an organization, if they are in a large organization, then they've got to move out of that organization and go find another place that they can continue to move forward in their career. So I think it's so much more challenging, but people have a lot more opportunity and resources to be able to move around and make things happen within their own financial life that way.
Where do you think the boundary is between the knowledge economy and the service economy? And how do you make a distinction between the two? And is one more stable than the other?
Yeah, I mean, knowledge certainly seems like there's with the rise of artificial intelligence and AGI and everything that's going on, knowledge is going to be table stakes, right? It's we can use all kinds of different sources to go find information, but it's the application of that information that's going to be the most important. So you're still going to need people to figure out when is the right time to utilize that knowledge and information. And on the services side, I mean that's just we've always had people providing all kinds of various services, whether it's something we physically cannot do or don't have the tools to be able to perform that, or maybe the tools are really expensive, right? I look sometimes around the house and go like, oh, I could do that, and then you go to the hardware store and you realize that it costs $150 or $200 just to get the materials before you even started, right? So sometimes it is, more economical to just, hire the expert, have them take care of it, and then it's all done. And I think we are going to see more and more of that, right? It's out of convenience and also out of, a know how to get it done right the first time, instead of making mistakes and having to go back to the hardware store 15 times, as we've I'm sure all done in the past.
My first job at McDonald's, and this is going to kind of divulge my age a little bit, I was earning $3.15 an hour. And I was working for a corporate owned McDonald's store in West LA. And I actually used to open that store on the weekends, where a whole bunch of my friends would line up expecting to get free stuff from me. But that's a separate story. Now we are at a point where we are buying Happy Meals that make us feel actually kind of sad because of how much we're paying out for it. And of course, on the flip side, the owners of the business and the franchisees are also hurting, because not only are they dealing with all the regulatory issues with having employees in the state of California and making payroll and making a few bucks off of these products, right? Where do you think we're headed in terms of, do you see a point of equilibrium coming up where, I mean, we're paying $20 an hour to employees, and yes, and I 100% agree that it's very difficult to have a nice, productive life working full time at $20 an hour in California anyways, right? Do you see a point of stability or equilibrium coming up based on what you see in the markets?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the employment markets, I think automation is going to pave the way for a lot of some of these things that we would consider more service jobs in some aspects, fast food and those sorts of things. If you walk into a McDonald's or any other fast food, chances are you're not even ordering with a person anymore. You're, typing it in on a screen. If you haven't already, put it into the app and it's already sitting there ready and waiting for you, right? So, things like automation are going to, just be the way of the future, because, costs have gone up and margins have gone down. I think that what that does is it starts to, take the workforce into other areas. I mean, that's one thing. I think we always worry about it was always so much better, before, and how are we ever going to get back to that place? Progress is constant, and things are always changing, and we've got to change with the times, right? And so, and people are adaptable. We are extremely adaptable.
Of course.
And so I
Thank God
think
for that.
exactly, yeah. I mean, if we weren't, we wouldn't be living out here in the desert in June,
True
right?
story.
So before air conditioning, this place was a ghost town, right? And now here in places like Phoenix, and really anywhere south of kind of on the southern states, is very much adaptable because of one thing: air conditioning, right? And so, we mold, we adapt, we find opportunities. Doesn't mean it's always going to be easy. There are going to be challenges, but I have faith in people, that people are going to are move and make things happen. It's not always going to be the way it was, but we've got opportunities out there, and it's just a matter of really finding those circumstances, and really, I think training, that I think our education system is going to have to take a really significant look at how are we molding and adapting younger folks. I think about my kids, that their experience is going to be very different than my experience growing up, and how do we mold those opportunities for them to have the most circumstances to be successful. It's an interesting dynamic, and we're going through some monumental changes right now in terms of technology, and then the ability for us to harness that, and turn it into opportunity for the workforce.
Sure. Now, Brandt, do you spend much time on the social platforms?
I feel like I need to, just to kind of understand what's going on, whether that's in business or in other aspects, or even just pop culture these days.
Yeah.
It moves so fast. It's hard to it seems
Sure.
like we can't keep track. But yeah, I mean a little bit here and there. Yeah.
So the question I have is, what kind of financial myths drive you crazy on these platforms? Do you come across stuff that you're like, my God, I can't believe it? And of course, there are many reasons why we should be outraged at the social platforms, right? With all the disinformation, misinformation, and the flat out lies, right? In the financial sector, what drives you crazy?
There's a lot of them. There's a lot of these.
Give me the top three.
I mean, anything that sounds like a get rich quick, opportunity or scheme, I find that very, very challenging, and
Okay.
flat out wrong in most cases. And the more you see people, driving around in very expensive cars and very, exclusive lifestyles and those sorts of things. I mean, my question is always like, show me the balance sheet, show me what we're actually working with, because the clients that I tend to find, and the people that have the most amount of money, are the ones that don't look like they have any money at all, right? They are the most humble. They drive regular cars and live in regular houses, and they're not lifestyles of the rich and famous type of characters. So anytime we start going down those rabbit holes, and then you start to see the cracks shortly thereafter, and then I think just obviously there's a lot going on in the financial world these days, just in terms of what is currency, what is all of these things that we've kind of always just had as foundationally, and then a lot of these things are being challenged, whether actually being challenged or at least conceptually being thought about. I think any type of investment where you're going all in on something, and it's going to make or break your overall financial life and circumstance, is a very challenging thing to do. It's certainly not something that we would advise any clients on doing. I think about myself as much more of a risk manager than I do on the how much money can we make in an investment front, right? Like we're looking to try and get
Mitigate risk.
yeah, what the market is giving us, maybe a little bit more, or more importantly, avoid the big downside circumstances when markets aren't cooperating quite as well as they tend to. So risk management is the most important.
Absolutely. And of course, that's key to your client's age group, right? I mean, you deal with, if you're dealing with somebody who's fresh out of residency, for example, as a doctor, you would treat them differently than somebody who is mid-career or mid to late career. their level of risk is going to be less, or, how much risk they're going to want to take on, right?
Absolutely. And I think especially when it comes to, people nearing retirement or in retirement, we call it irreplaceable capital. This is money that we cannot afford to lose because we don't have the ability to go back to work the way that we did and go earn it back, right? So we want to make sure that we're really mitigating that. And even Walmart's not hiring greeters anymore, so we don't have that option, right?
Right.
So we
Right.
really
Shoot.
have to make sure that
That's too bad.
we've got that money that's really shored up and providing the sustainable amount of income that clients need to live out the life that they want to.
Yeah. Now, personal observation from the wealthy people that I know is they tend to spend their money on primarily on three things. They make sure they live in a nice house, more often than not, a nice set of wheels, and experiences. And the rest is banked in, investments, real estate, other vehicles that, have a good return on their investment. Has that been your observation as well?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I mean, we're definitely much more of an experience-based economy these days, where people are valuing those experiences. That's why the concerts are selling out, and you're seeing travel and those sorts of things, really be almost a non-negotiable in a lot of people's lives. That they want to live a life and have experiences. Sometimes more than necessarily things in their life. It seems like we're collecting less, I'll say, valuable things. Maybe that doesn't mean we're collecting less stuff, because people are still, Amazon boxes are showing up every single day, to a lot of doorsteps. But I think the thing we try and really work with clients is breaking the dependency on the amount of money that they need as they're moving into a time where maybe income is going to be less, whether that's through retirement or if there's a circumstance where they're not working for whatever reason. How do we reduce the overhead as much as possible, and then that allows for a lot more freedom and flexibility to be able to make those decisions as needed. Sometimes it's for really great reasons, right, that we get to have more experiences. Other times it's out of pure necessity that, hey, we've got to do this to make sure that our family's on the right path going forward.
That's one of the biggest changes I saw in my own industry, going back 25, 30 years ago when, we would interview potential hires. Lifestyle rarely was spoken of. These people were just hungry for taking on shifts, taking on additional calls, schedules, call responsibilities, doing more cases. And there's definitely been a shift on that front where more often than not, the number one question, and I'm not in that scene as much anymore, but when I was doing it, the key questions were, is there call involved? What time do I get home on average? And do I get my weekends off? And how much vacation time do I have? Those are probably the top 4 or 5 questions that are asked. And then they talk about the money. It's almost like the money is kind of like a footnote or an afterthought. First, let's get the lifestyle taken care of. And I don't know that I would necessarily fault them because, if you compare our society with the Europeans, if you go to like Italy in August, forget about getting into a lot of the stores. They're closed. Those guys are on vacation. And from the idea of productivity is really not on their radar as much. And yet their index of happiness is higher than us. And so we still value work. We still value productivity. If you look at the App Store, there are tens and tens of productivity apps and to-do lists and this and that. But it seems like we're on the extreme side of that right now and not at a healthy balance point where you still need to bang out a lot of work to be able to save early on in your career, right? So that when you're mid-career, you can actually slow down and be able to enjoy the fruit of labor. And of course, I say that knowing a lot of doctors who died a couple of years short of retirement, and they worked super, super hard, and they're like a year or two shy of retirement, and they had all these big grand plans, and boom, they're gone. And their family gets to enjoy what they were able to save.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there is a much more of a focus on, a balance rather than, so much sacrifice for so long. I saw a statistic not too long ago. I think it was, around the 1970s where, fathers tend to, I think it was 13 hours a month that they tended to spend with their children, and I mean, it's like I hit 13 hours within like 3 days. It's like I love them to death, but again, they can be very energetic and very loud from time to time. But so sometimes a break is nice, but you want to be involved. You want to be that family that at least our family does, that spends time together, has experiences together, and we put a premium on that. And I think as a society, at least in this generation, it seems like that is much more of a priority than taking 4 extra shifts a month, or working 70 hours in a week. Obviously there's going to be times where that's necessary and circumstances, but I think the norm, at least from a societal perspective, is it's got to be more of a balanced approach. And I think a lot of that honestly has to do with just the circumstances of the home, right? It used to be 50, 60 years ago, there was one person that left the home to go get the bread, and the other person stayed home and took care of the household. And that is no longer the case. For most households, there's dual working families, and both people are needed in order to make ends meet a lot of times. So it's a push and pull, and there are seasons in life, some more demanding than others, but I think it's great that we have a lot of avenues these days that people can find that flexibility that works for them more so than maybe what there was even 10 or 20 years ago.
And of course, on the flip side, on the employer's side, your job is not as secure as it once used to be. I mean, I lived next door to people who had worked for Boeing for a lifetime and were living on a pension. And of course, we have some models of that in our industry. Kaiser Permanente, for example. Once you're vested and you retire with Kaiser, they still take really good care of you. And so it's still a big draw for physicians when they come out of residency. Now, Brandt, on a personal level, you are responsible for the management of, I would assume, tens of millions of dollars in assets, right?
Couple hundred million.
Couple hundred million.
Yeah.
Okay, I apologize.
Yeah.
So you are responsible for that, and you are also responsible for keeping very close tabs on the financial sector, as well as the geopolitical environment, right? And
nothing going on these days. Yeah.
No, not at all. So, which I want to talk about for a second, but how do you stay grounded? How do you find balance in your own personal life with such a high level of responsibility on your shoulders?
There's certainly a fine line of staying informed while trying not to get, completely glued into, what seemingly is, the whims of, every 10 to 15 minutes, things seem to be changing, just in the last couple of weeks here with a lot of the, trade talks and tariffs and all the other things that are going on. My rule there for a while was wait 72 hours to see what actually happens. Because even before that, 24 hours, it was, things were on, they were off.
What is it now? 4 hours?
Yeah. I mean, in some respects, for sure, it feels like we're always, glued to all the alerts that are coming through the phone or emails or what have you. So yeah, it's the bombardment of just notices and notifications and things that were, demanding our attention. And I find myself having to turn those things off from time to time, whether it's, getting out on the golf course with good friends or my family. I've got the kids and my wife golfing these days, which has been a lot of fun.
Oh, how cool. That's
Yeah,
great.
so turning some tunes on and riding around the golf cart and getting some lemonade for the kids, and and they have a ball. So I think that's where I find some amount of solace, if you will, just getting away and turning off the constant barrage. It'll be there waiting for you when you come back to it. But finding just a little bit of time throughout the day, and maybe a little bit more time on the weekends where you're just trying to get away from it all.
So just to alert the people who invest with you, which golf course are you hiding at when the market tanks?
Yeah, it's one of the 125 that we have
We're
here in the
just
valley. So
curious,
yeah,
nothing, we're not planning anything.
absolutely. Yeah.
Brandt, you have been on various nonprofit boards. How has that shaped your personal or professional growth?
You've got to give back to your community, and you living in it is not enough in the give back. You've got to have something more tangible than that, whether it's your time, your treasure, or your talent. And so I think a combination of those things. How can we rally support for some of these nonprofits or organizations that are doing great work and providing some amount of benefit to either our community or those less fortunate in our community that need help or are at a time of need. So I'm currently involved with the Desert Cancer Foundation, which is really near and dear to my heart. My dad had brain cancer and had 4 surgeries throughout my childhood of growing up. It was originally told that he was given a year to live, and he lived just over 40 years after that diagnosis. So pretty amazing. And
What a beautiful story, Brandt.
yeah, I love the opportunity to have people bring that sense of optimism in getting through something that is very, very difficult. So I was real fortunate to be asked to join the Desert Cancer Foundation, which pays for cancer care. So that's the role of the organization, is to basically help take those costs away from the patients that cannot afford to pay for their own care, and get them through that treatment cycle, whatever the circumstances are. So that's been a really cool organization to be involved with. The organization's helped hundreds, if not close to over 1,000 people now in our local. All the money stays here in the Coachella Valley to help people, residents that need help getting through cancer care.
What a great story. Now, have you heard about the Elisha Foundation, by the way?
No, tell me about it.
Is you just send money to it,
Oh,
and
there you
we
go.
take care of it. And, once a year, I'll send you a statement about where that money went and which resort. But it's all good. Don't worry about it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Brandt, how do you and your wife talk to your kids about money?
We're getting there. The asks are a lot. Let's buy this. Can we have that?
And of course, they never stop.
Of course, yeah. And then I think the other thing is the maybe the once or twice that you do give in, how quickly that thing that they absolutely had to have becomes the wait, what, like you. I don't even remember, or I don't even play with that anymore. And until now we've started putting things by the door, getting ready to find a new home, give it to a friend or somebody else, or like a thrift store or what have you. And of course they go, don't give this away. I love playing with this thing, right?
Right,
So
right. I played with it last year.
exactly, it's a constant battle. We're still on the younger side, but we're starting to build some foundations in terms of what is money, how do we use it, what do we need to think about it. And I've got some ideas, including one of the best ones I heard is where you go get your month's salary in $1 bills or $5 bills, whatever makes the most impact that you want, and you put it on the table, and you say, all right, let's have a family meeting, and you say, here's all the money that comes in on a monthly basis. And then you chop somewhere in the 30 to 40% range, and you sweep that aside and say that all goes to taxes. So that doesn't exist anymore. And then you've got another bunch that goes towards keeping the house running, utilities and mortgage and property tax and all the other things. and it leaves in, then we've got another pile that goes towards, food and clothing and, all the things that we need to make sure that, everybody's doing what they need to in the house. And that leaves a very small pile of money, right? Relative to the rest of it, that says, this is what we have to work with when you say, I want that toy, or I want this, thing, or those sorts of things. So having that conversation at some point it'll be very enlightening
Of course.
when we get there. So,
do we still have to pay taxes? I heard the IRS staff was cut down to 6 people.
yeah,
One of them being the people who cleans the offices.
You can try, but I specialize in the tax avoidance, category, and to follow the rules of the IRS. When you get into the evasion side, that's where you get the bracelets, and we try to avoid that circumstance. But
Of course,
as far as I've heard, taxes are still.
It's still a go.
Yeah, they keep coming out of the check, so we'll see. But yeah,
Got it. Let's play financial myth or fact, Brandt.
Okay.
All right. So economy is going down the drain. We need to go all cash. Fact or fiction?
I'm going to go with fiction, just in the sense of, for most of our clients, we are lifelong investors, right? And the way that you make the most amount of money is to stick with your plan and continue to invest throughout market cycles, because like we saw not too long ago, just a couple weeks ago, where the market was going down significantly because of economic threats that were going on. And shortly thereafter, we saw some of the best days that we've ever seen in the market, right? So I think we're very quick to want to move things around, and the fact that we've got access to our accounts literally at a moment's notice on our smartphones, tablets, and computers. People can hit buttons all over the place and decide to go to cash and those sorts of things. It tends to be a losing strategy overall, because you've got to be right twice, right? Maybe you're right on the way down, but then you've also got to pick the opportunity to get back in
on the way up as well. So, all right, fact or fiction? I'll never be able to buy a house in California. It's hopeless, and we need to get the hell out of California under the current environment.
It's certainly very challenging for a lot more people. So I'm not going to say I'm going to split that one. It could be factual for a lot more people, unfortunately. I do think housing is a real challenge, and it's no longer the opportunity for most folks that it used to be. We've got a couple investment strategies that we utilize, and that's a big part of it, where they're building multifamily apartment buildings, and they're looking at it. I think one of the statistics was, basically quote unquote entry level housing is less than 7% of the new supply that's coming online. So we are not building, and that's nationwide, and it's probably even less in California. We're not building houses that are approachable in any way for most of the people. Really, the only people that are able to buy homes is if you've got high enough income, or maybe fortunately you've got some family members that can help put a down payment, and especially with interest rates the way that they are. So yeah, I wouldn't just limit it to California. I think it's a national problem.
Okay. From a global perspective, let's say a 30,000 foot view, does California still provide a value proposition to stay here for most people?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly areas of the country that seem to provide, depending on circumstances and what people are looking for. I think California gets a bad rap a lot of times, and people forget that if it was on its own, I think it's somewhere between the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world. So somewhere around 38 million people in the state. There's a significant amount of opportunity and the GDP that comes from California. But again, I think when we're talking about on the margins, or where people are seeing less and less opportunity to go forward, it makes other areas look more appealing. Whether it's business friendliness or purely just less regulation and less taxes in general. I will say, in some ways, I think for example, Arizona, a lot of people look to Arizona, they've got a flat state tax of just over 4.5%. The interesting thing is, it would take around 150 to 170,000 married filing jointly in California to pay that same amount. So, even though the marginal tax rate is obviously much higher, when you look at the effective tax rate, you actually can pay a little bit less depending on your overall income within California. Now, the cost of living is quite high, so that certainly is a factor to bring in as well. So.
Do you think that applies to the Coachella Valley as well? Is Coachella Valley still a bargain compared to the rest of California? I mean, I do, but what do you think?
I think certainly when you compare it to certain areas, especially Southern California, when you're looking at the LA County areas, Orange County, San Diego, our valley does provide more of a bang for your buck, if you will, in that aspect. But it's becoming much more expensive. That gap is closing, a lot more quickly than I think a lot of people thought it would.
Myth or fact? We live in financially uncertain times.
I'd say, I mean, that's absolutely factual in terms of every time is a financially uncertain time.
Thank you. I wanted to hear that because I hate that term. We live in uncertain times. Was there ever a time where things were certain? Never.
I mean, I keep polishing the crystal ball, and it does not show me what's going to happen tomorrow. So
I thank you for clarifying that. I hate that expression. I feel like beating up people who say that. It just doesn't make sense.
There's a lot of people that say that 1968 was one of the most tumultuous times. In kind of more modern times, you had a lot going on politically. You had some assassinations and some other things that were going on. Very, very difficult time, right? And not to say it's, this is going to continue just like that in terms of, the history doesn't always repeat itself. But I think the human spirit is the thing that keeps us going, right? That we're all here to try and, make it to another day and build our families to make a better life for everyone that we can, both in our families and in our communities. And I think having some optimism, not trying to sound Pollyanna-ish, but we have to have some hope. That's what keeps us going.
The whole reason this podcast exists is to encourage people to look at the glass as half full, and then some. Then it can be filled even more. And there's such a thing as confirmation bias, right? If I have a certain paradigm of the world and I think that everything is going to hell, then I'm going to seek and find every bit of news that confirms that. And so, in a sense, now I'm beating my own drums here a little bit. That's the whole reason I'm doing this podcast, is to show the positive, shed a positive light on life and on people and what is good, and that things could be better. And, hope is extremely important, right? So a couple of other questions for you. Myth or fact? There is such a thing as good debt and bad debt.
I'd say that's very factual. Debt is a tool just like anything else, really, to be able to lever or utilize funds that you don't necessarily have to help get you to a place that's going to be more beneficial. And so whether that's, I think mortgages tend to be looked at as good debt. You need a place to live, and we've built an apparatus within just banking and lending in general in terms of how our nation looks at housing, that you can go out and get a mortgage and you get some benefits of that from the tax perspective and what have you. You can also use your home like a Visa card, And there are plenty of lenders that are out there that allow for that to happen through home equity lines or second loans or those sorts of things. So I think that comes back to that kind of personal responsibility of what are you trying to accomplish, each one of us, in terms of our what's important in our financial lives, whether that's stability or if it's levering up to get the biggest house on the block or whatever the case is. It's a tool, and how it's used is decided whether it was a good strategy or a bad strategy in that aspect. I think student loans, that there's so much been said about it over the last several years now, and it's certainly looked at very negatively, in terms of this thing, but I think it also has provided a lot of people, especially in areas of much more necessary schooling like medical or engineering or some of these areas that require a much higher level of education to get there. That is the tool that you have to utilize in order to be able to get there for folks that don't come from an area where school's paid for, or they're they didn't get a scholarship, which are very much more difficult to come by these days.
Yeah, that's one thing I've always been taught is the best investment you can make is in yourself. And I paid for my own medical school education, and I say that to my kids all the time is you can never go wrong with educating yourself. And very soon we're going to have 3 kids who have master's degrees, and one's going to have a dental degree, and so I'm very proud of that. Brandt, a couple of wrap-up questions. What does a rich life mean to you? How do you define a rich life?
The thing that you cannot buy is time. And I don't think we put enough emphasis on spending our time wisely. One of the most, I think the scariest thing that you can look on your phone is how often you look at your phone. They have that graph, or it provides maybe a weekly summary on
The screen
hey,
time.
exactly, yeah. And you kind of think about how often we have to look at that. I've got, in order to log into certain websites and those sorts of things for work, we have to have access codes. So we're constantly picking up the phone just to get those access codes or what have you. And so I try and factor a little bit of that, but also it's like, yeah, it shows how often you were looking at Instagram or news sites or whatever the case was. So I think we don't put enough emphasis on the amount of time that we spend in some of these areas that are maybe less fulfilling than they otherwise should be.
Now, obviously, there were a few things we didn't get to talk about. I would love to have you back as a guest. We didn't talk about things like crypto, real estate, index funds, bond market, things that are definitely, on the radar with a lot of people that I personally have zero knowledge of crypto, and kind of scares me to even talk about it. But what's the one thing, as a kind of a final note, what's the one thing that you wish more people understood about building real wealth? If you had one thing to tell them.
I think a lot about people who we start to work with, and maybe they've had some negative experiences in one way, shape, or form, whether it was somebody told them to invest in a particular type of investment and it didn't work out, or somebody sold them something that was not good at all, right? And so they had a negative experience with maybe somebody in the industry, which is unfortunate. I think the biggest thing that it's kind of that once bitten twice shy kind of mentality. And so the thing I try and work with clients, especially ones that are building wealth, is don't focus on the rates of return or how much money is going up or down, especially as you're starting to make those contributions and building that that nest egg, if you will, whether it's retirement accounts or non-retirement assets. We try and show as we're building things, there's a period where all of a sudden you go from your contributions being the main driver of building that account value, if you will, to now you've created it, you have enough money in the accounts that now the investments start to make sense, right? That the investments are actually the thing that's driving those account values higher, not as much reliant on whether you're making contributions to it or not. And I feel like not enough people get to that point. When you're first saving your, $100 or $200, is maybe you got your first job and you're starting your 401k, and then all of a sudden you see the market, the bottom drop out, and it become $10,000, and now it went to $8,000, and all people can think about is, I lost $2,000. Like, well, you really didn't have it anyway, because this money wasn't for you. This is for yourself, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, maybe longer in some cases. So I think really just sticking to a commitment of, I'm building something for myself and my future and my family, and letting that process take hold, but also not putting all your eggs in one basket, if you will. Being diversified in things that make sense to you. If it doesn't make sense, chances are you shouldn't be invested in it.
That's been one of my strategies anyways. If I don't understand it and someone can't explain it to me in terms that I can appreciate, it's not happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. Many of my clients say, explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. And the more we can do that, it makes it real for clients to really understand how and why they're invested.
Final question. Should I give up on that Ponzi scheme I was building?
Yeah, those those don't end well. So I would not advise. Yeah,
certainly not when I'm announcing it on my podcast. I guess
you don't want to call it that. Yeah, yeah.
I'll call it the Elisha scheme. I think it sounds a lot more proper. Brandt, you've been a phenomenal guest. I feel so much more intelligent just hearing you explain the market, your philosophy on the current market, economy, finance, and business in general. Love to have you back on my podcast just to explore some other topics in more detail, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, there's a lot of the technical stuff that we get into, and we actually have a great our chief investment officer for Beacon Point does a phenomenal job every quarter. We have what's called a macro and markets meeting. It's available on our YouTube channel, so you can go check that out. Just Beacon Point in YouTube, and he does a phenomenal job at breaking a lot of the technical aspects of what's going on in the markets and the economy. And we're very fortunate to have a great group of individuals in our research team that provides us a lot of these insights. So I'd be happy to come back and talk more about that. But if folks are looking for a way to get education, you don't have to put in your email, or we're not no sign up required. It's available on YouTube for anybody to check out.
Do me a favor, send me those links. I'm happy to put it up on my podcast page.
Sure, absolutely.
For you guys. And I had a great time. I really value your knowledge and your wisdom, Brandt. And I appreciate you giving me the time today. And I'm going to make all of my family listen to this, by the way.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Brandt. Have a great rest of the day, and happy Father's to you. This recording is taking place in the couple of days before Father's Day. So
happy Father's Day to you 5 times over. That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. That brings us to the end of another episode of All Ask the Questions Around Here. I'm Dr. Elisha, and I hope today's conversation gave you something to reflect on and perhaps something to smile about. If you enjoy what you heard, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next week for another journey through life's complexities and comforts.